I'd like to call the special meeting of the Board of Finance for Tuesday, April 26, 2015 to order. This evening's activity is to make some revisions, potentially make some revisions to the budget that was defeated at referendum a week ago today. The way we will proceed this evening in traditional format for the Board of Finance, we'll have public forum at the beginning of the meeting for any of those wishing to express their opinions about the budget. We will then deliberate as a board, which will more than likely include some questions and hopefully some answers from the Board of Education as well as the Board of Selectmen. Then we will make a recommendation, and then we'll have public forum at the close of the meeting. With that, is there anyone who wishes to address the board in public forum? And if so, please come up to the microphone, state name and address for the record. And can everybody hear me? I don't think we need to use the room microphones then. Yes. At the podium, please, Ted, come on up. I'm sorry.
Ted Zeus, 72 Broad Street. I had a question for the Board of Finance regarding a report that was produced by the First Selectman's Office in 2010. It was referred to as the Board of Selectmen's Task Force for the Review of Operational Efficiency, Town of Guilford. And I'm just curious to know, there was a whole list of recommendations. It's about a 12-page report. If you could comment on what of those, if any of the recommendations, have been implemented and what savings the town's currently enjoying.
I would suggest you ask the Board of Selectmen that question, but I will give you the courtesy of one area where I know there have been some, there's been some movement. The town has engaged the services of its auditor, Bloom Shapiro, and has produced a preliminary report on the consolidation of IT functions between the schools, the town, and the police department. To my knowledge, that's the only ones that I'm aware of at this point, but I think that question is best served for the Board of Selectmen.
All right. So there would be no answer to that this evening, is that right?
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. Charlie, hold on a minute. Can I ask how this is germane to the deliberations this evening?
How it's germane?
Yes.
Well, I think the representation from the Board of Finance to the public in the budget that we just voted on was that that represented the town's best effort and use of public money to provide the services to the town. That's how I took it. There was quite a bit of discussion about it and everything else. And having evaluated that personally, to go and look at that and see what we've done to improve the efficiencies of the town, went back to see what efforts we've made over the last 6 to 8 years to, improve the efficiency of the town, discovered the report, read it, and my question is, in good faith, there was a good faith effort that was made in 2010. I'm just trying to get a sense of, have we done that? I'll give you an example. And the report recommends that we have 2 different facility departments in the town. We have a Board of Ed side facilities department and a town side facilities department. It recommends that it be consolidated. Right. And the question, I think, in the budget that I see is that we haven't done that. So I'm just questioning, if we haven't done it, why didn't we do it, and could we realize some savings in that area?
Well, we'd be happy to engage in a reasonable conversation. I think you came up here knowing we didn't have any answers to that, and you were expecting us to look like we didn't have the answers, which is exactly what just happened. And it is the purview
I don't think that's accurate,
excuse
sir.
me. It is the purview of the Board of Selectmen to make those types of decisions, not the Board of Finance. And your read of the charter was probably pretty consistent with mine, and those types of personnel decisions are made at the Selectman's office or the Board of Education. So, Charlie, would you please answer his question to the best of your ability?
Well, my name is Charles Haverda. I'm representing the Board of Selectmen this evening. Mr. Mazza is out of state and is not able to attend. Ted, needless to say, there's a couple of pages of recommendations here. I know for a fact that a number of them have been met, specifically in HR and whether it be job descriptions and some of the changes in the pension plans and that type of thing. In all fairness to you and to the public, I think these ought to be spelled out and researched in writing. I don't feel that I would adequately address each one in the spur of the moment this evening, but I know that more than a few of them have been addressed, such as you know, some of the labor negotiations and job descriptions and those types of things. So has every single I been dotted and T crossed? Probably not, but some other things have been done that have been even more beneficial. So, you know, there are a couple pages here. Mr. Mazza will be back next week, and we can get back to you.
Okay.
All right? Any, did you have another question?
Did you have other comments for us, Ted?
Well, I think it's just a question. I was wondering if you could review, there seem to be a number of numbers that are around in the public domain about what the increase was this year that either passed or did not pass. And if you could go through the numbers, that would be helpful.
That's fair. That was going to be a portion of this discussion this evening anyway. And specifically, if you were asking what the spending percentage increase is, this budget, it was 4.17%. I believe the numbers for the town on the operating budget were 2.5%. The operating budget for the Board of Education was 1.99%. The increase for debt service was 35%. The tax increase that would have resulted from that would have been a 2.86% tax increase, or 0.81 mils over our current mill rate.
And where does the additional money come from to facilitate the 4.2% spending increase if the tax increase is not 4.2%?
We have additional revenue coming in from the state of Connecticut. We have additional tax revenue in the form of the MRSA money, the municipal revenue sharing. And we also have the additional revenues, tax revenues coming in from some of the development that's happened in town over the years.
And is any of that coming out of savings or general fund, town money that currently exists that did not get expended in previous years?
Yes, there was some monies that went to pay down some of the bond covenants. But that was appropriated for that specific purpose well over a year ago. And I believe it's $200,000.
But pointedly, not from unassigned.
It's not from unassigned fund balance, no. Was that the question?
I'm just trying to clarify for the record where the money's coming from to do all that. Great.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Joe Petrowski, Valley Shores Drive. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the Boards of Selectmen, Finance, and Education for the work they've done for this budget and for the community. As a taxpayer, I appreciate it. That's what brings me here tonight. We live in a great town, and just this past winter, for example, the few storms we had, the streets were cleared. We had some wind damage, trees were down. Town crews and chippers picked up the brush around neighbors' yards. There was a Sunday afternoon windstorm and trees went across the road and Public Works was out there. Our roads were in good shape. I had EMS in my house last week for an elderly family member who got sick. Things are great. But I voted no, and that's what brings me here tonight for the board members. Just so you hear why one person voted no. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the way the town is run, because I think it's being run very efficiently. We have a new superintendent, which with his predecessor has brought our education system into the 21st century. This community should be applauded for the new high school, $93 million. I was in favor of it. My kids are out of the system. They won't benefit from it. But there seems to be a segment in town, and it's the educational lobby. They seem to be on a course of like a nonstop train with education. They're asking for too much all at once. You got a $93 million school. My kids went through a system that the buildings weren't maintained. I applaud the Board of Ed for their advocacy for trying to keep the buildings safe, clean, and updated. But I think people have to realize this community does not have an open checkbook. And I'm thankful for what they've done for the seniors and everyone else, but That's one of the reasons why I voted no. It was a wake-up call. I never expected this budget to go down, but it did. And that's what brings me here tonight, to share this information with the board members. Maybe in the weeks to come, it'll make your deliberations a little easier as to where the cuts have to come, how to represent it to the community. And I hope next time around, I'll vote no, I'll vote yes, but if I have to vote no, I won't vote at all, because I've done that in the past too. That's my right. I could abstain. Thank you very much for your time again, and I hope to be a stranger. I was a regular here for a while.
Thanks, Joe. You and I go back over 20 years of these
long time.
kind of
Too long.
discussions.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your comments. Anyone else wishing to address the board? Going once, going twice, going three times? Sold? Okay, we move on to the meat of the evening's discussion, and that is potential changes to this budget so that we can send it back out to referendum, which is scheduled at this point for May 17th. I think if we would bring either both the Board of Education and and Charlie from the Board of Selectmen as Joe's representative here this evening, I think we may be posing a couple of questions of you folks. I, for one, am interested in, Charlie, if you would recap some of the areas where the Board of Selectmen discussed potential cuts in the event that this board took some actions to cut. I think the numbers were 100, 125, 150,000, and I think the Board of Selectmen even had come up with 165. So would you mind sharing with us what some of those ramifications might be?
After the failure of the budget on Tuesday, Wednesday morning, Joe called together the department heads, and I was at that meeting. And, Joe expressed to them at that point in time that the budget went down, obviously, and it went down by such a low turnout of voters and a low margin of difference that, some people would argue that it was a get-out-the-vote issue. But that didn't really matter. The bottom line is we have to respect the referendum and the turnout and the results. So with that in mind, Joe explained to the department heads that he didn't want to affect police or fire operating budgets because of public safety and that type of thing. But he asked them to take a look at their budgets that afternoon and come back to us with any recommendations or suggestions of areas that they could make some cuts. Basically what, we came up with, I'm not going to put any numbers on them.
That's fine.
I'll just explain what they could be. Natural resources, and that's just cutting back tree trimming. It was approximate, I'll put approximate numbers for the lowest values that, that we had discussed. That was tree trimming for $5,000. Economic development. Well, let me just comment on natural. I'm going to comment on each one of these so everybody for the camera can appreciate, these cuts are real. I mean, after the last storms and everything, everybody notices throughout town the tree trimming that's been going on, and the power failures have been less. I mean, there's a reason, okay? When you stay ahead of things and you maintain things, you feel the effects. The next issue was economic development. We cut $7,500 from that budget. That was our membership in what we call RECs. Often when people comment about efficiencies, they talk about regionalization, working with your neighbors, and that type of thing. Well, that's what RECs is. I mean, you talked about, the increase in revenue in this budget. We had a $24 million increase to our grand list because of economic development. But, this was the membership in our regional organization, and it was something that we thought maybe we could live without for a year. The library, $10,000 in payroll. Sandra Ruoff runs a great operation over there in the library, but she felt that there were some changes that she could make in payroll. Engineering and Public Works, $15,000. I mean, we had a light year with snow removal this year. Who knows where it'll be next year, but, we thought we could take $15,000 out of that. Knowing that, if we had the big storms, We do have the fund balance that we have been trying to take care of so that the roads would get plowed, but we took it out of the budget. Parks and Rec, that was a number of things. The biggest thing was painting of this building. Now, in some of the complaints or commentary about the high school, people complained or people commented that the only reason we need a new high school is we didn't maintain the old one. Well, here we go. We're not going to paint this building. I mean, and, you know, and hopefully in 10 or 15 years, we're not saying, oh, we didn't take care of this one. Capital, there were pardon me? $8,000. These are the lowest numbers. Capital. There were a number of things in capital. Most of them came down to there was a license plate reader for the police department. Some people probably applaud that, but you know that's something we could live without for a year. Was repairing the patio up on the fire department. We didn't go into the fire or police operating budgets, but we did go into their capital budgets. Also, $10,000 in education and tech support. We run a town hall on a system we call Munis system. Sheila wasn't able to be here this evening, but basically what it comes down to is we're not using that program to the best of its ability. We have to enhance it with some more packages, they call it, and some training. And again, this was one of those recommendations on the efficiency report. I mean, we have these systems, but we're not totally up to speed. We aren't able to purchase all of the updates and/or have everybody as trained as they possibly could be. And that was a total of $69,000, and that ranged, actually capital could range from 69 to 109. So that brought us between 125 and 150,000, I think.
Thank you, Charlie. Any specific questions of Charlie?
What was the license plate reader, Charlie? What was the number on the license plate reader?
$18,000.
Thank you.
The license plate reader is more than a gotcha machine. What it did in the description, well, I think you were at some of the hearings. Because the new cars are so integrated with, you know, information and all that technology and everything, what would happen is if a police officer made a stop and/or if a license plate that was, you know, on some wanted list or however they described their different lists, it would immediately pop up as it drove by. And the police officer would know immediately if he was making a stop, he'd know everything he had to know about that license plate. And that's a safety thing nowadays. I mean, you know, well, I don't have to get into, you know, a police officer stops a car, you don't know what's going to happen. Okay.
Lou?
We did receive, obviously, I think we all received some communications after the vote, and some questions I'll just pass on to get a response, okay? There was one inquiry concerning evidently a $30,000 increase in workers' compensation. You're not going to know this, but I'm just reading to you from an email that I received. What's the reason that the insurance line is what it is? And
Well,
what's the matter with just knocking
I think whether
$30,000 out?
it be healthcare, workers' comp, any, the insurance industry right now, because of, you know, the things are going on a national level, it's just plain in flux. I mean, there are numbers coming out that just don't make any sense at all. We worked very hard as part of that efficiency report to address HR, and then you have injuries in training. So what do? You not train people because they get injured in training? I mean, HR is, or workers' comp is always a function of experience.
So you're saying that's a figure that's a quote from our carrier?
Right.
And we're part of KERMA, which is essentially a regional cooperative, right, with other municipalities? Okay, so I guess just to drive home the point, is there discretion in paying that number?
No.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have our HR or finance person here, but
I appreciate that. I know, I'm just trying to respond to some
I
of the
just know
questions.
promoting a business, you don't have an option. When they say what your experiences be, they pick a number, and you can work throughout the year to try to get it down, and that's part of what the efficiency committee talked about, but you're at their mercy.
Fair enough. And-
Same thing with healthcare costs, I mean,
Sure, no, we're all familiar with that, although frankly, the healthcare increase was not that dramatic.
this year.
This
Last year was frightening.
There was also an inquiry about just taking, really frankly, one of the smaller line items, social services, a $25,000 hit from that. And before I even ask the question, I'm going to just make the observation that between the 2014-15, in other words, 2 budgets ago, and the 2015-16, there was a $40,000, $35,000 increase in the salaries, and I believe there was an increase in administrative staff down there. They had.
They did
Yeah, that
ask.
was actually a recommendation from the department. Gary might know more about it, but, specifically what it was, they had an intern for a while, and they changed over their billing system.
I was going to get that.
And, okay, and they changed over the billing system, and they found that they had so much benefit from the changeover that the head of the department there thought that they could internalize that and do away with the part-time position.
So there's
I
this-
didn't personally think that was the greatest idea, simply because you have a department head, who is probably more valuable doing something else besides the administrative side, but that's, she felt very comfortable. She said the new training system was working out very well.
Okay, so they do have, it is off, that particular line item, it is offset to a certain extent by some revenue that doesn't appear in the
Exactly,
expenditure
exactly.
budget, right? Okay.
Any others?
There's some others, but those are the ones that jumped out at me.
Anybody else? We're good? Thank you, Charlie.
The only other comment that I'm going to get into, and I think it was Mr. Zeus brought up about the undesignated fund balance. And I'm sure members of Board of Finance are very familiar with it all, but I just want the public to realize that, we don't budget for an undesignated fund balance, okay? What we are striving to get to is approximately 2 months of cash flow. In this town would be approximately $15 million. We're at about $7 million, okay? And we're trying very hard to keep our bond rating as good, if not improving it, because of all of the borrowing that we've had to do for the high school. For example, Madison, their fund balance is in excess of $12 million. They have a AAA rate. We would like to get there. We're not there yet. We're about $7 million, and we should be in that 12 to 15 million range. So we're probably never going to get there, but, to start chipping away at that, especially with what's happening at the state level. We don't know what we're going to get hit this year with the cuts in, whether it be ECS or whatever funding is going on, but, that's where that's got to come from. And if we don't have that, that's a major hit. So, we've been working very hard to get our fund balance to the recommended levels for 2 reasons: to get our bonding rating back, maintain it, and get it back to AAA, and in case something happens with all of the issues going on at the federal and state level, we have to keep this community going. When things come down, we have no place else to go. We have to be ready to deal with them. Okay?
Thank you, Charlie. Gary, what do you have there?
I went back to the budget book on workers' compensation, and what was submitted in the original budget said our losses in workers' comp have remained high but are leveling off. We are anticipating a 5% increase, and I assume that's based on discussions with KERMA over last year's budgeted amount, which would include any payroll increases for the year. So, it's basically a KERMA-designated number.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I understand the Board of Education met last night, and while they didn't necessarily come up with a list of items, there was some general discussion about what potential cuts might be. And if you could, Chairman Bloss and Dr. Freeman, if you could share with us the nature of some of those conversations and, where you would need to go, what potential areas you need to go to if you were to cut between $100,000 and $150,000.
Sure, and I think I appreciate the opportunity to answer those questions or respond to those observations. I do want to start off, though, with just maybe a couple of what I think might be helpful to your board, and certainly I think was helpful to the Board of Education in talking about what the next steps are. Obviously, I think all of us on each of these boards, on the Board of Education, Board of Finance, voted in favor of moving this budget, the last budget, forward to the voters. I agree with Mr. Haverda that we need to respect the vote. We understand that a majority of people did not vote to support the recommended budget. However, I do want to just remind this board the process that we went through in presenting the Board of Education's proposal to your board. First, Dr. Freeman, I'm sure he remembers this, we reduced Dr. Freeman's budget request by almost a full percent, about $800,000. So there were programs, there were items, there were spending proposals in Dr. Freeman's budget through the Board of Education that the Board of Education said respectfully, we just don't think this is the right time for that, or we don't think that it really is worth doing. So what we wound up Mr. Chairman, with the proposal that we gave you with an under 2% spending increase was the second lowest spending increase that we have presented to your board in the last 13 years. There have been other years that have been significantly higher, but we thought that this was a good, first of all, we're in a different model. We think that we've actually incorporated some efficiencies into our budget, things like special ed transportation, things like embedded professional development, a better program on technology, a better program on building maintenance that actually is now, I think, incorporated into our budgets moving forward and is going to allow us to not increase, not seek some of the increases that we did back in 10 or 15 years ago. So I think what the Board of Education would encourage this board to do is, first of all, respect the vote. Clearly, a majority of people did not vote in favor of the recommendation. I think that it would be appropriate to react to the result, but neither underreact, not showing respect to what the vote was, nor overreact, and treat the vote like it was some significant repudiation of where we are moving as a school district or indeed as a town. And I say that for a couple of different reasons. One is, and Mr. Haverda noted this, this vote was in percentage terms the closest vote in at least the last 30 years. I've got the data going back to 1987. I don't have it going back before that. There has never been a budget vote this close in percentage terms. This was also the lowest turnout since at least 1989. There are 85% of people in the town who were registered to vote who did not vote. Now, nonetheless, as Mr. Haverda said, we do recognize and respect that the majority of people who came out to vote, 40 more of them voted against the budget than voted for the budget, and so we do need to react, but not overreact nor underreact. I do want to remind the board that we did have multiple public hearings. And at our public hearings, Mr. Chairman, you may recall that the request of the public that appeared at the hearings was to add money to the budget, was add money for arts and education, especially in the elementary schools. It was to add money to implement an early start time program at the high school, and we decided not to do that as a board, unanimously, but decided not to do that as a board. What that led to is this second lowest request that we've had in the last 13 years, and I want to remind the board that our per student spending is still at the state average. We do not overspend compared to comparable towns. We do not overspend compared to the state average. And the results that we get, as I shared with you at the hearings, the results educationally we have in Guilford have improved materially in the last 10 years and have not had the kind of budget increases accompanying them that many towns have had. Your hearings, Mr. Chairman, had largely the same impact or the same results in terms of people who did appear at the hearings, and there were not specific suggestions at any of our hearings to cut any specific item or even line. The quality of the product does matter. And that is something that I hope your board will take into account as we move forward. It would be our request of you that you, in light of where we came in originally, which was below 2%, and given the closeness of the vote and the lack of percentage participation of the vote, that you provide an alternative to voters for this referendum that will make changes, but does not make changes that would affect the provision of educational services in a material way, and really, and to not force us to move backwards, not force us to undo some of the reforms that we've undertaken in the last 5 or 10 years, not force us to go back to raising class sizes, not force us to do away with the embedded professional development, or to do away with the changes in technology that we've undertaken, not force us to do away with the maintenance of the buildings that now we've got a very good handle on. Allow us to keep moving forward and to really and to make sure that voters have the opportunity to keep our educational services at the level that we would expect, and specifically relating to class size. We are a staff-intensive budget, and the staff, very substantial majority of the staff has contact, is involved directly with the provision of educational services. We've talked about this before, but the only way that our budget numbers are going to change drastically would be to affect the delivery of educational services to children. That's just a fact. Dr. Freeman, I think, has some specifics, if you would, and then we'd certainly be prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blas. Mr. Hoey, I believe you asked us to talk about a range of around $100,000 to $150,000, what kind of impact that would have. At this time, without extensive conversation at the board level, but working with our HR office and looking at the budget position, we would project that we would be able to generate reductions in that ballpark of $100,000 to $150,000 by reducing first the teacher salary line, and we're looking to reduce that by a significant portion. We feel, however, that we'd be able to make that reduction at this time without necessarily impacting staffing and class size. Since the budget was prepared, and we do the budget work very early in the cycle, we have had a number of retirements that have been presented to our office. We believe that by thoughtful hiring, by looking carefully at where we bring in replacements for positions that are experiencing attrition, we'll be able to generate a significant portion of that. Additionally, we've had a resignation out of our clerical ranks. We believe that with some restructuring, we will be able to reduce the building administrative assistant line, and then we would look to make some additional minor reductions in line items like heat, electricity, and even our medical line. Again, we prepare our budget very early. We've got more experience with our new building. We have had more months of experience and positive experiences in the medical area. So again, we would suggest that $100,000 to $150,000 we would be able to generate by looking at the teacher salary line, the clerical secretarial salary line, heat, electricity, and medical lines. We also began talking about more significant cuts. If we begin talking in the area of $250,000 or higher, Mr. Blas already suggested there's no way to do that without looking at staffing levels. And since the majority of our staffing is in the classroom, we don't have a deep central office, we don't have deep support areas, we'd be looking at classroom positions and looking at enrollment and making our best projections moving forward for where we could most responsibly make reductions in those areas. I'll only note that the budget we brought forward this year is already responsive to enrollment and is already built on a reduction of 6.5 teacher FTEs and 5 paraprofessional FTEs. So the budget that already sits in front of you has reduced the teaching ranks and has reduced the paraprofessional supports in response to enrollment. Any further changes will go beyond responding to the enrollment declines.
I had a follow-up question relative to the teacher reductions. And have you seen preliminary kindergarten enrollment stuff come in yet? Because this clearly is a risk for you folks.
It is.
That's one of the areas where you were planning on getting savings because you were going to reduce teachers at the kindergarten level.
And that is, and it is built into this budget. If you'll recall, we had a very extensive demographic study done that was finished, I think it was finalized 3 years ago. And as to this year's enrollment figures, it was predicting enrollment in the kindergarten of about 167, I believe. We wound up enrolling 211. So something happened. Something unanticipated happened. We did actually have to add kindergarten teachers out after the budget was adopted, but there were two sections. There was no alternative to that. So we've talked a lot about this at the Board of Ed. Is the demographic study, did something change? Is Guilford attracting more people to town now with younger children, and so that maybe we have to go, or was it a one-year anomaly? Now, standing here today, the demographic study predicted that for this upcoming school year, 16-17, we would have 167 children enrolled in kindergarten. As of today, we have 166 enrolled to go into kindergarten next year. Last year, after this time, after the end of April, we added another 50 approximately, or 45 children to the kindergarten class. So if I were a betting person, and I'm not, I would bet that more than one person is going to enroll in kindergarten between now and September 1st. I would think that the board is going to have to evaluate that projection, that demographic study. We may well have to address the staffing at the kindergarten level. And obviously, if they're enrolling in kindergarten, they're staying K-12, by and large. There's obviously a few people filter in, a few people filter out, some move in, some move out. But that's going to affect the demographic study projections for the next 13 years. Now, and in some respects, that's really good, right? It's good in that I think Guilford is a very attractive place for people to move right now. And I think, but it is certainly causing us some concern in terms of how we're going to staff. And based on the budget that we already presented you, the budget we presented you assumed that the demographic study is right, that 166 kids are going to enroll in kindergarten in the fall, and it looks like that's not going to be true. It looks like the number is probably going to be higher. But we'll handle it. As long as we've got a little bit of room, we'll handle it.
Right. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions?
Just to follow up, I know that the projections for just to talk about the demographic study, it seems to have been off the first 3 years since it's been returned. I imagine some of that's the new high school is throwing it off and the full-day kindergarten, but is there anything else that you think
The
might be
study was
impacted?
completed by the same demographer that completed our last 10-year study. That one over its 10-year life was accurate to within 1%. It was almost to the student exactly accurate. This one was off in its first year of projections. It appears to be off in its second year of projections. To be fair, when the report was delivered to us, Dr. Chang noted that he could not take into account the impact of the new high school or the new full-day kindergarten, and in fact asked if he could revisit his figures once we had some new history behind us with those two new variables at play. I expect that we'll be reaching out to him shortly and asking him if he'd like to revisit his figures.
And I think there are other things that go into it. Frankly, I think that I think the market perception of the schools in Guilford right now is very positive. U.S. News, I went through all of this, obviously, at our hearings. I won't go back through that, the International Baccalaureate Program. All those, I think Guilford is a destination town right now, frankly, and that, I think, is affecting enrollment.
I have a question. What is the student-teacher ratio at the high school level, at the grade school level currently?
At the grade school level, it's a little over 17. But remember,
class sizes, yes.
Class sizes. But again, that's there are going to be classes where it's lower, there are going to be classes where it's higher, because especially in elementary schools, the way we've got 4 elementary schools, the range is much broader between schools and between grades, because you either add a section or don't add a section, so you're either at the higher end of the range or the lower end of the range. The average is a little over 17 in the elementary school.
How would that compare to, let's say, Country Day School or Xavier at the high school level?
I don't really have any experience with either Country Day School or Xavier. I have some experience with other public schools, and it's right about where the average is.
How about Hopkins? Or I'm trying to get a feel for a public school versus a private school. Where are we?
Private schools, premier private schools tend to run class sizes that would be in the very low teens. It would not be unusual at a Hopkins or a Choate to see class sizes of 12 or 14. They will run an occasional lecture hall course where, as an exception, you might see 60 students in a lecture hall. Our class sizes tend to be very comparable to other DIRG B and DIRG A public schools. The class sizes do not take into account other certified positions. To do the actual student to certified ratio, I'd have to go back and get that for you. That's not a figure that I have committed to memory.
I think that's actually in the U.S. News and World
It is.
Report
It's one of
study.
the
And I
figures.
want to say it's 13 approximately, but that counts administrators, for example, into the overall
And
average.
school counselors and.
You know, and I guess if the follow-up observation to that might be, we spend about roughly $17,000 a year per student on average. I wonder what the tuition at Hopkins is. Is it more than that or less than that?
I don't know. It's mostly the oldest private school in the country, and they have a pretty good endowment. So.
I would be interested in knowing what their costs were, but
Ken, you got a question?
When did we receive advice on this recent flurry of retirements, and how many teachers are involved in that?
I wouldn't describe it as a flurry, but I have received retirements as recently as this week. Retirements come in on individual schedules. When we prepared our budget, I believe I was aware of 1 or 2 planned teacher retirements, and at this point we are in the ballpark of approximately 5 or 6, I believe. And I wouldn't be surprised if 1 or 2 more come in before. Again, we prepare our budget very early. We begin working on it in late September, and it's not unusual to receive a retirement notification in May or June.
And that number is even lower, though, than average. We've had some much greater numbers of retirements in some years past.
And it beyond the original preparation of the budget?
Since the
Approximately 4.
Yeah,
I believe so. I'm talking in rough numbers. Yeah, yes.
Mike.
And then if we can hire less experienced individuals with lower steps on the salary scale than those people who are retiring out at top step, it generates what can be a significant reduction to the teacher salary line.
That was my point, is that the retirements, when you presented to us several weeks ago, I think the number was 4.
And we were using those to offset the reductions
But
in
the
actual
last 5
positions.
years, the average was, and I just wanted
Over
to
10.
clarify that it was like 12, 17, 13.
We had retirements of 17 one year, 16 one year, 12 one year, 8 the previous year. We haven't reached the number of 8 yet this year.
But it's still April.
Yes.
But just to follow up on that, I would imagine that with the teacher population that you have, if you've got numbers of 12, 15, 17 retiring year after year, you're not going to be able to sustain that. You're going to be replacing those people, and you're not going to, I would imagine, you're not going to anticipate that level of retirement year after year.
Correct. Last year, we had 4 retirements overall. We've had 57 retirements over the last 4 years, 5 years. We've got a much younger teaching staff than we did 5 years ago.
And presumably, they're going to be here for a while before they come to retirement age.
Correct.
That was my point months ago, that if you have 330 teachers and the average life of a teacher is 30 years, you would expect 11 per year on average. Am I correct in thinking that the range for a para is 25 to 35 salary?
Yeah, that's correct. That's in the right ballpark, I believe, $35,000.
So my question, the para line's not a small line, it's 2.1 million. And we cut 5 paras, which is roughly $125,000. The para line, though, is up by $100,000, which is 5%. If I add in the 150 that we saved through the cuts, that gets us up to over 10%. Now, most people, I thought, were on a 2.5% to 3% increase, so the para line is actually up over 10%, which I don't understand.
The para line is a volatile line in that we often are required to add paras during the budget year that aren't part of the regular budget preparation. I would not be surprised if we had to add paras after last year's budget was finalized above the budget number. And so even though we're looking to bring down by 5 going into this budget number, that that line item could have been inflated between budgets.
So relative to the last year, we may not have actually had any para cuts at all then? Because a 3% increase on $2 million is $60,000, and the line increase is 100.
And I should just mention, the reason that we might add a para over the summer is, say, somebody moves into town over the summer.
No, I'm just questioning the...
I'm just explaining why it
As
is.
you know, I've been trying to figure out bucket, and you keep telling me that I'm looking at it incorrectly, which is fine. But especially with regard to the special ed program, how, the multiple hats that people wear, but I'm trying to figure out the buckets of cost, because salaries are obviously a huge driver. So...
Part of that increase is paras that we use over the summer for special programs. In previous years have been budgeted under a teacher's salary line. So in order to accurately reflect the paras that are working over the summer, we moved the budget over to the para line, which is why part of that increase.
So this is the first year you've done that?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Mike?
I'm just going to go back to the staffing, I guess. When you said the next level of cuts past 150, so I think you mentioned, let's say, $250,000. Is it fair to say that you'd go to staffing? What does that look like as far as what does the staffing look like? Obviously, we just talked about paras. But if you were to go into the staffing, are we talking about 3 to 4? Does that sound about right? I mean, if you're going to go into staffing, and that's going to be the next step of any kind of a cut, is that the number that we're talking about, or could you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I mean, that's going to be
I think
very
it's
much...
important to know what's going.
It's going to be very much driven by the bottom line that you gave us. So if we've suggested that we have strategized a way to make it to 150, and if you decide tonight that the reduction for the schools is going to be 250, to make another additional $100,000 in cuts, if you're working from the low end of the salary scale, you'd be looking at approximately 2 teacher layoffs. If you asked us to go further, if there was discussion of a $500,000 reduction here tonight, then you're looking at approximately $50,000 per teacher that we begin until we've worked through anybody on the first step of the salary scale. And as the number of reductions gets larger, the cost of each reduction is going to increase, because contractually layoffs would occur at the bottom of the salary scale and they would follow the steps up that salary scale. So we would really need to know what number we were working towards before we could answer that question with any specificity.
How much would that affect class size?
If we were talking about 1 or 2, then we would look very carefully and strategically and try to make those reductions where we had the largest number of, so we would look for the grade level that had the largest number of sections, and you would be able to spread that impact across the most. If the number begins to grow beyond 1 or 2, we're going to lose the ability to be strategic fairly quickly, and you're going to begin to look at class sizes. Again, Mr. Bloss referenced that class sizes in the elementary schools sit at the high teens on average. Our largest classes would be in the low 20s. Our smallest classes would be in the mid to high teens. We would begin impacting those that sat at the lower end of that scale. You'd begin to look at all elementary classes beginning to approach or exceed 20 fairly quickly.
Thank you.
How many students in a typical kindergarten class?
15. We target to be in the 17.5 roughly is K through 4. Kindergarten classes are currently more in the mid, you'd be looking at 15 or 16. They're a bit larger this year than they were in our first year of full year kindergarten because of the scheduling impact. Had we not added the additional 2 sections, we would have had kindergarten sections that broke 20.
So if you had...
Actually, they're...
Current, yep.
Well, this is current.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, it's 16 at Cox, 16 at Jones, 18 at Lakes, 18 at Leap,
For an
average of 17. So
a little bit.
That's at the high end of really what
It's
you
a
want to do.
little bit larger than we targeted because of the enrollment bump that we saw there this year, and that's with the 2 additional sections.
So if you had another 50 in this coming up year and you had to add 2 or 3 more sections?
Partly it depends on where they are. What
Yeah.
district it is. Is it a district that is at the low end of that? If it's a low end, maybe you don't need to add 2, maybe you can add 1. statistically, they're probably going to be spread out a little bit. And so do we have, if you add 50 kids and they're roughly spread out, chances are decent you're going to have to add 2 teachers. If you add 20, maybe not, or 15, maybe
If we had
not.
a kindergarten campus where all of our kindergarten sections were located, then we'd probably be able
easier.
to be much more efficient, and you'd be able to stay with existing staffing or add 1. But when they're spread out in 4 different locations, it becomes harder to maintain those numbers.
Actually, I have a follow-up question on that, which is, are there open classrooms in each of the grade schools?
There is one open classroom at, there are 97 elementary classrooms district-wide. There is one open classroom at Cox, there is one open classroom at Leet, there is one open classroom at Lakes. There are no open classrooms at Jones.
In fact, at Jones, we have taken away a classroom that was previously dedicated to the before and after school programs. That is now used as a classroom during the school day as well. There are no open spaces at Jones currently.
So, you've heard me say many times, and I am going to say it again, we do not need any more elementary school capacity, but we are at the very top end of the range. We'll be able to handle it, but there is not a lot of empty space.
You had as your third priority within the $100 to $150,000 range, heat, electricity, and medical. And then if you went beyond that, it all had to be teaching salaries. Are there any other areas other than the salary area where you could achieve reductions if called upon?
The answer is yes, but they're minor. And, 80 to 85% of our budget is made up in salaries and associated benefits, essentially medical benefits. So when the reductions are significant, it becomes very challenging to generate any sort of significant number and work in only 15% of the budget. So if it were for a small additional amount, yes, we could certainly look at supplies or equipment, but those would be for very small dollar amounts, yes.
Well, and the temptation, whenever there's was pressure on a budget, the temptation is always to do things, as the state of Connecticut is finding out, that are in the long-term disinterest of the town or the state. We have chosen in this budget not to play any accounting tricks or gimmicks with things like our medical expense line. And right now, our medical expense line is in good shape. And you remember, Mr. Chairman, that I don't know, 5 years ago, what were we in, $1 million in the red? We're not anymore. And whatever, it was a lot. And we're not anymore. We are in good shape with our pension funding. We are in good shape with our building maintenance. That's the capital improvement line is always the line that gets cut first, because you don't want to take away teachers. Well, okay. Well, if you don't want to take away teachers and you don't want to take away capital, there are not a lot of other places, frankly. We have done some really exciting things in special ed. For example, we saved $250,000 by bidding out each of our special ed bus transportation routes separately. That was something that we never did before. And it wound up leading to a great cost savings that has really been carried forward year after year after year now. That's not going to result in budget reductions every year. We've already got those reductions. We've got the reductions from the improvements in special ed, like with the autism program at Lakes, that has allowed us to not outplace as many children, and not incidentally, at all incidentally, we are delivering a better service, a better product. I think that those are the kinds of areas that we'd really like to maintain, and we'd like to recognize and cement the progress that we have been able to undertake in the last few years.
I would note this budget already essentially flat funds our maintenance line for the first time in approximately 5 years. We were looking seriously to invest and grow that line. In fact, at the encouragement of the Board of Finance, this budget, we've already chosen to essentially flat fund that line in recognition of the difficulty of this particular budget year.
Good. Lou?
Yeah, and just to be fair to the same email that I received, and I think everybody got it, but I asked Charlie some questions about, some recommended cuts to the town. There's some questions that were directed to the school. I'm just going to throw these out at you to be fair to this voter and to get a response. So one of them you touched on already, special ed buses. I mean, that's a,
I think I got the same email. I responded to her.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
So it is up, but it's
That-
less up than it would have been, but.
Well, that's up for, yeah, it's interesting. That's up for a reason. The reason is because we've brought so many children back into town, but they can't do regular transportation. And the reason it's up is because we were more optimistic than ultimately the IEPs allowed us to be. And we thought that maybe a greater number of those children were going to be able to take regular transportation, and it just didn't work. And so it was a very honest underassessment because we didn't have experience with it before. And so when you brought that number of children back in, we didn't know exactly to budget. We put in a number. We thought that it was going to work out. It didn't. We had to increase the special ed transportation funding. But that is simply because we have brought so many children back in the district.
There's a $70,000 suggestion for safety, sanitation, and upkeep,
I think that's the custodian at the high school.
probably.
There is a,
There is
Or is, I thought it might have been safety improvements.
Safety and sanitation is a line item in, under operating.
yeah, that's a line item, and much of what that line item is made up of contracts and annually required inspections. There's
Purchase services?
Yeah, and there is a line item, remember, the one new employee in this budget is an increase in custodial service.
that is specifically assigned to the high school.
Correct.
On the issue of taking care of that building. That, I think there is nobody in this room, and maybe nobody in any room in Guilford that wants to build a new high school again. And so we do want to take care of this building. We do want to maintain it, and that is why there is an additional custodial position.
Right, but Lou, I think the line item you're referring to is safety, sanitation, upkeep of building and grounds.
Yeah, it's up 11.8.
Yeah, that is your capital, and
Oh, okay. Dr. Freeman is actually getting some
And
additional
maybe,
information.
I was thinking it was some of the safety improvements that have gone on at the front offices.
it does include some of that.
They do include inspections, and some of the increase has to do with new systems in the new high school that we did not previously have to maintain and have annually inspected. Things like TecoGen, things like ice storage. So the systems that are generating some energy savings for us need to be maintained and need to be properly inspected, and we have to contract those services out.
There's also a $70,000 bump in sanding and snow removal in that detail from the previous year.
High school.
Yes.
And that's because
That was the one-year contract.
Well, that was the one-year contract. Remember, we were paying it in a different place last time. The year before, it was done by custodians.
It was being paid out of an overtime line previously, and we have now contracted out the snow removal at the new high school.
So that's not a 0 to 70 number. That's a moving one number from one place to another place within the budget.
I'm trying to just decipher this piece of information.
Yep.
That appears to be the case, and so you're not going to do the exact same contract for snow removal next year, but it will still be contracted out.
Correct.
Right.
Most likely. I mean, we haven't, most likely.
Okay.
We'll also have more lot space to plow next year than we had.
Thank goodness.
Sections of it this year were not finished and will be next year.
And that figure is still at 80,000?
Correct.
And some of the other things, frankly, I think I touched on already. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did respond to her as well. That's actually the only email I got relating to.
I
to this.
appreciate people taking the time.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Very much.
I said the same thing to her.
Good.
Anybody else? Any other questions? What of it? No? Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, I just want to put a framework together. I'm going to take from where Mr. Zeus led me at the beginning of the meeting, and that is what we had presented, although some might suggest that talking about history is not necessarily useful. When we presented the original budget, which both budgets were presented to us from the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, they called for new spending of $3,782,000. And I spent a significant amount of time focusing on an aspect of this budget which I don't want to lose, and I'm going to reiterate. The operating budgets, I thought, that were brought to this board were very, very good operating budgets. The town came in at 2.5%, and the Board of Education came in at 1.99%. Mr. Petrosky mentioned earlier about our beautiful new high school. This is the year that we had projected we were going to have a dramatic increase in our debt service to pay for that high school. Well, of that $3.78 million increase, $1.95 million of that is the new debt service that we're paying at the high school. If we didn't have that level of debt service increase, our mill rate increase would have been substantially lower. There's more in capital, the debt service, the capital retirement increases than there were in the operating budgets. So I just want to, I think that it's important for people to understand that the driver has been the debt service retirement. The operating budgets combined were 2.16%. So I think it's people need to remember where the costs are on this budget. I'm prepared to make a recommendation, and I'm going to share it with the board members. I don't want it in the form of a motion yet, but I'm prepared to make a recommendation. On the night of when the results were passed in, I was disappointed that it didn't pass, and I probably fell prey to the fact that I believed my own thinking or my own rationale that these were good budgets. And maybe I hadn't done a good enough job telling people how good these operating budgets were. So I take some credit or some blame for the potential failure of this budget, because I'm not sure we got the word out about how good a job both the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen did with their operating budgets. So I'm going to pass something out that's going, you guys should recognize the format of this document. And this is the standard summary sheet that we used for expenditures, revenue expenditures, and mill rate calculation. As a straw man, I'm going to put out there that we cut $150,000 from both the Board of Education and $150,000 from the town budgets. Unlike previous years where this board has been forced to make cuts, where we traditionally made a 1/3, 2/3 split between the total dollar amount, I do not feel we need to make that particular type of arrangement, because the Board of Education brought in a budget of under 2% at 1.99%. They did an awful lot of good work. That's not to say the town didn't do good work to get to 2.5, given the pressures of their budget. And as we've heard from both sides, 70 to 80% of our budgets are wrapped up in personnel. So the suggestion that I have here would cut $300,000 in spending. And what that would do would be reduce our increase, our level of spending increase, from 4.17 to 3.84%. What is that? 6.5–7% reduction in the spending increase. Believe me, I'm not going to fall prey to that. That's not a reduction in year over year. It's a reduction in the increase. But I think it's significant. It takes it down from, as I said, 4.17 to 3.84%. There's another aspect of this that we haven't talked about with much depth, and that is what's going on in Hartford and the potential for this community to lose revenue from the state of Connecticut. There have been a couple of budgets published. The governor first put a budget out in, I believe it was early February, and we used the revenue projections that he had put in his budget. Those revenue projections were carried through to last week. Since the time that the Board of Finance adopted the original budget and today, we have seen 3 or 4 different interpretations of where the state may go. One budget called for eliminating over $900,000 of ECS money. Another budget called for eliminating $650,000 worth of MRSA, excuse me, that's an unfortunate name, the Municipal Revenue Sharing Act. At this point, I don't think there's anybody in this room who would feel comfortable telling me or telling their neighbor where the state's going to be in terms of revenue. I saw something in the Connecticut Mirror last week that suggested Malloy had revised his budget that we were only going to lose $4,000 between ECS and MRSA. That's when he took all the money away from some of our neighbors to the east in Madison, who was getting their entire ECS formula wiped out. So at this point, I don't know what number to put there, but I'm putting a number there. I'm saying in recognition of what we can pretty reasonably assume is going to be a cut, that we reduce our municipal revenue sharing grant from the state by $200,000. That is going to offset what would have been some potential savings on the mill rate increase. What I provided you folks is those three adjustments. They're highlighted in yellow under the Board of Selectmen budget column for revenue and the Board of Finance changes. And what you see depicted here is the new number of 3.84%. You also see down at the bottom on the mill rate calculation that it goes to 2.74%. So what I'm suggesting that we discuss here and possibly take action on is really three things that I think are moving us in the right direction, according to some folks. A, we're reducing the overall level of spending. B, we're reducing the mill rate, the original mill rate, the projected mill rate increase. And C, we are acknowledging that there's an issue in Hartford that we need to be aware of. And while the $200,000 may not be enough, we don't know what that number is going to be. So that's my straw man for discussion here, and comments, questions? Mike?
Well, there's a subject that I wasn't going to bring up, but it was brought up already during the meeting by a couple of people, and it was started off with Ted, and then it came up again regarding the unassigned fund balance. And when this first went down, I thought maybe there's a possibility of mitigating any kind of an increase by using taxpayer money. It is taxpayer money, unassigned fund balance. Now, this wouldn't be the idea of taking it and bringing it down, decreasing it, and not replenishing it. The idea would be to bring it down, and then we fully anticipate that we are going to be putting back in. And I thought about that a little bit more, and then the state news came out, and that would not be a very prudent move. Now, it may not be considered prudent by several in this room, and I would understand that, but I do think that it deserves some recognition and some discussion and some, I wouldn't say answer, but some idea of why we may not go there or why we shouldn't go there, because right now we may very well have to go there if the cuts to the revenue from the state or the reduction in the state revenue actually takes place. We may have to go there. That was something I wanted to bring up, because I think there's a lot of residents out there that may say, well, you know, you're holding a lot of our money. Well, you know, our first person in public forum mentioned it. Our chairman addressed it, and it was also addressed. So I wasn't going to bring it up, but I think it's fair for the viewing public to hear why we're keeping the unassigned fund balance where it is and why it's the right thing to do, and why we may really need to use it, not for mitigating any kind of a mill rate increase. Honestly, the only other things I would say that are more backing up and in agreement with what you've already heard is we've been involved in these budgets since December, talking to the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen. We felt when we put this first to referendum, we unanimously voted that this was a responsible budget. And And I think it's fair to say that regardless of voter turnout, even though it was the lowest that we've had since 1989 or 7 or whatever that year is, it should be noted that it went down. And there should be some reflection of that. The no voters came out and they voted against it. And we should do something about that. I do want to say one thing about the mill rate, though. Matt, you had mentioned about that it would be much less than the increase in the mill rate had the debt service not been figured in on this.
Correct.
And the mill rate actually, I know I said this when we first sent it out to referendum, that the mill rate actually would have gone down. Now, of course, all bets are off on that going down because we don't know, and this is because of the grand list. In case it wasn't clear, the grand list did go up. I know that there's been some discussion in certain forums that the mill rate is continuing to go down, or I'm sorry, the grand list is continuing to go down. That is not the case, it went up, and that does help us. But when the state revenue may be reduced, then maybe that mill rate would have stayed even without the debt service as opposed to go down. I'm in agreement with this, and I think that Chairman Bloss said it best, is that you don't want to overreact, but you don't want to underreact. And I think this is about where we need to be to get to a level that is acceptable for the next referendum.
Mike, let me just talk a little bit about the fund balance, the use of fund balance in the preparation of a budget. This board, the Board of Selectmen, signed a policy statement several years ago that said we would not, unless there were dire circumstances, we would not use fund balance, undesignated fund balance, as part of operating budget projections. So, A, it would go against our policy. B, the reason we don't want to do that is that when you use a one-time funding source to mitigate an increase, the following year, you have to find that same amount of dollars, that one-time funding, just to get back to where you were the previous year. I know your point is, if we are producing surpluses, could we get away with 1 year because we produce a surplus to replace what we used? But that's where I go back to the original policy decision, not to use undesignated fund balance in the preparation of operating budgets, to balance operating budgets.
And I thank you for saying that, because I do want to make it clear that I do believe that there are residents out there that feel that that should be used. And this is the reason why we're not, so I'm glad that you further.
And it probably begs to be mentioned that at our meeting a week ago Monday, when we talked to the finance director, we were asking a question, and a dear friend of mine used to sit on this board, asked every month from January through May of the then finance director, what's your projection for surplus at the end of the year? Well, Sheila reported to us that we think there's probably going to be $500,000 to $600,000 in excess revenue. And there are a lot of folks who are saying, well, how could that happen? Well, the state passed that law, the Municipal Revenue Sharing Act, after we set our budget last year. So they also did a couple other things. They took away some of the grant monies that we formerly had, and they added in the municipal revenue sharing monies, which the net effect turned out to be about $500,000. So, yes, we are looking at a surplus on the revenue side because we're going to hit our tax collection rates, but we're also getting an unexpected amount from the state, which, as I said earlier, most of us project we are not going to get all of in the fiscal 17 budget year. So, other comments or questions? Ken?
3 years ago, our total budget was $85 million. And this year's proposed budget is just under $95 million. And I voted yes to the initial budget a few weeks ago. because I do believe that everybody worked really hard to try to cut the nickels and dimes. But that's really exactly what it is. And most of the people in this room have a vested interest in the outcome of this budget. The people on this board have been doing it for a long time, so we are going through the motions that we've been going through for years, and it's been working. It's a beautiful town, the services are great, and I found, there are a number of things in town that I don't necessarily agree with, but I love living here, and I think, like I say, the services are fantastic. I voted yes because I believe that in order to effect changes to the budget, it is going to require some significant changes in the way we look at the budget and the way we go about these negotiations that we do. I'm frankly disappointed in the speed with which we are sitting here now, with the amount of dialogue that has or has not taken place between the various departments and the members of this board. When I voted yes before, only 3 people had come forward speaking out against the budget. Now I see 1060 voted against it. Not a mandate by any stretch of the imagination. We usually get 800 to 900 nay votes. 1060 is roughly, it is 7.4% of our registered voters. The yes votes for the budget was 7.1% of registered voters, so we had less than 15%, which has already been mentioned. So I'm curious to know, if we get a higher turnout, are people really in favor of the budget, or are they not in favor of the budget? I think that a cut of $200,000 or $300,000, as several people have mentioned in meetings here and in prior meetings, it does somewhat of a disservice. If I voted no to the first budget, I'm certainly not going to vote yes to a budget that has only $200,000 or $300,000 in cuts. Having said that, I don't know who those people are or what they're looking for. As Matt pointed out, the debt service represents 2.1% of the increase. So if everybody were held flat, we would still be up 2.1%. I believe we have to honor that commitment. There were a lot of people that came and voted for the high school, and I think we have to go through with that. So anybody looking for anything less than a 2.1% increase, I think it's unfair and unrealistic at this stage. Some of the steps that need to take place going forward, of which there are a lot, I don't see from where I've been sitting any progress or indication that changes are going to be made. With regard, for example, some of the contract negotiations have resulted in defined contribution plans as opposed to the defined benefit plans. I believe that there's several unions coming up for renegotiation, and I hope we'll do our best to continue along that path. Same thing with HSA spending accounts. We know that saves us money, and there are additional negotiations forthcoming that I hope that we can save money through that. There's busing at the high school. The high school is going through an extensive busing study now with regard to start times at school. I believe we pay too much for buses, but I'm not a busing expert. Apparently we have the busing technology. We're going to pay $1.8 million this year. I see a lot of empty buses. My kid's bus has about 7 kids on it, and I see a lot of other empty buses in town. I know a lot of people drive to school, so the cost per student is quite high. If you use all of our students, it's roughly $500 per student that we pay for busing right now, which is up considerably in the past 10 years. Other changes that I think we could look into that was mentioned, Ted Zeus mentioned the efficiency task force. One of the things was talking about a longer work week. I'm of the belief, maybe incorrectly, that most of our employees are on a 35-hour work week. Now, I know it's not, nobody wants to jump to 40, but if you jump that to 40, that's a 14% increase, which implies that you can have a 14% headcount reduction. I know that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but there are savings to be affected by looking into things of that nature. Certainly not going to please any of the union people. Having said that, with regard to union people and non-union people, I haven't met anybody in town that I don't like, so it's difficult to come out and be critical and suggest we make cuts to people's departments, especially with supervisors in the room. I think there's some supervisors that frankly should be eliminated. None of them are sitting in the room right now. So I think there are a lot of changes that I think we could make that could perhaps save us meaningful money going forward, but I don't see it happening now, and I don't see us taking the steps necessary to make some of these changes. With regard to the state, let me give you another example. We are getting a grant of $3.5 million for road construction on Long Hill Road to widen the road between Long Hill and Hubbard, which is about it's less than half a mile. And we're upset about taking $1 million hit, potentially, from the state on the education side. I believe we're road poor. Long Hill Road, there's nothing wrong. To me, it's just a gargantuan waste of money. We have 164 or 6 towns in the state of Connecticut. If you took $3 million away from their road constructions, you'd get close to $500 million right there, which would put a big hole in the dike that they have in Hartford right now. We're repaving River Street. I live on River Street. It's a nightmare. The road isn't that bad, frankly. I know there are potholes up at Route 1 and River. They're going to repave Broad Street so it can be shiny and new. People pass me going 50 miles an hour on Broad Street. It's an old street. There's nothing wrong with the road. But again, I think we spend money in places and at times where it doesn't need to be spent. With regard to some specific suggestions, I think it's ludicrous that we pay our selectmen $10,000 each a year. To me, that's an easy $40,000 savings. The members of the Planning and Zoning Commission and of the Board of Education work equally as long hours as the members of the selectmen who are not first selectmen. To me, that's $40,000 that's easily saved. I believe that all of our department heads, including our first selectmen, are overcompensated. I think that this notion where you get a 3% raise or whatever the contractual number is every year, there should be a cap on it. And I don't know what that number is, but I don't think you should walk in and expect to just continue to get raises upon raises upon raises forever. You should know going into your position that you're capped out at, if it's $100,000, which is roughly our median income. Actually, I think we might be up to 104-ish now, but give or take, it's right around 100. Perhaps that would be a place where we could start, but we have a number of people that are making more than that. I think you could, the economic development, I think Brian does a great job with economic development. I don't know whether it should be a paid position or not. I think there could be some consolidation with planning and zoning, with natural resources, with economic development. I love the library. I think Sandy does a great job. Do we really need to spend $1 million on the library every year? I think you could cut 10% there. Police and fire, I'm not going to touch. Nobody wants to touch police and fire. I think the fire chief and the police chief, I must say I've had incidents with both, and I have not met a single person in the fire department or police department who were not utterly professional and incredibly nice people. I think both chiefs do a great job with their personnel. And nobody wants to be the one making cuts to either of those departments, because when something goes wrong, you don't want the finger pointed at you. Having said that, I would hope that each of those departments could find it in their means to knock $50,000 out of the budget. I would like to think that each of them could find $50,000 and not feel that it's really hurting the services they provide to the town of Guilford. Public Works. If we can't cut $100,000 out of Public Works, I'd be shocked. Communications, I still don't really understand, and maybe somebody can explain it to me. The full-time salaries are $187,000, and the overtime is half of that again. So we pay $187 in full-time and $85 in overtime, and I understand there are benefit issues involved, but maybe we could go to 3 or 4 part-time positions and knock off all the full-time time there. Paying for snow removal, and this gets back to the efficiency report with the job description. I know we farm out a lot of snow removal. I think the firm that got the high school contract this year did a great job. I think it's crazy that we pay up $55,000, and I do think we're over budgeted. We're $80,000 budgeted, I believe, for snow removal for next year. I think you could knock 30 to 40 off of that right now, and that could come off of the budget too. I think we should pay as you go for snow removal. I don't think we should be trying to guess how much snow is going to be coming down. And if we do try to guess, I think we should go with the experts' forecast. They forecast light snow last year. I think we paid dearly for that. Got a few more cuts. Parks and Recs, I would like to say, Rick, I think you do a great job, and your people do a great job, but I think we could shave 100 out of that. We have $175,000 in contingency, which we've never used. I don't see why we have to have $175,000 in contingency this year that we never use. I know the selectmen talked about it, and they're really adamant about keeping it in, but frankly, I think it's an easy one to take out. I know workers' comp claims were the worst in the state back in 2010, which is the time when Ted mentioned his efficiency task report. I don't know whether I'd like to think we've improved quite a bit. If we haven't, then we're paying too much for that. Lights at the high school. We have budgeted $250,000 for new lights at the high school this year. And I read in the paper, I think I read it in the paper, that the estimated cost is now up to $330 or maybe $350. We're under budgeted for the lights at the high school. My comment on that is twofold. One, if it's a safety issue, then clearly it needs to be done. If it's not a safety issue, I would certainly push it out. And I would also put that into bonding. I know we're not going to do any bonding this year, so ideally I would attach it to the $9 million in bonding that we're anticipating for next year. I think it's crazy not to take advantage of this low interest rate environment. If the economy gets crushed, then we're going to be able to buy goods and services at lower prices than we are now, so we won't have made a mistake by jumping into the market too soon. If the Fed does start raising rates and the economy goes up and does better, then we will have been well off to have gone to market. So again, the lights to me is a capital project. It should be capitalized, not expensed. And I would roll that into next year as well, so that's another $250,000. Hockey, we pay $20,000 for ice time. I pay between $2,500 and $3,000 for each of my children to play travel hockey. They're 6 and 10. The 10-year-old doesn't play travel. Every hockey player that plays hockey at Guilford High School, I can assure you, has grown up playing travel hockey, and those families are paying a lot of money for their kids to play hockey. So I don't know that it's fair, and I love hockey, it's my favorite sport. I don't know that it's fair to ask the rest of the town to all of a sudden subsidize high school students playing a sport that they've been playing and paying for all their lives when times are tough. So there are probably other sports that you could go and ask families with money. Now, I appreciate the fact there are families that some can't afford it, and we should be willing and able to help out those families that can't afford to make the payments. But there are a number of families, I can assure you, that have been paying a lot of money for their kids to do extracurricular activities. So all of a sudden, when they get to the high school, I don't know that it's fair for the rest of the town to bear the brunt of the cost. Electric, I was surprised the electric estimate didn't come down by more. I would have thought with the new technology in the high school, we could do better. It went from 310 down to 300. In terms of capital up at the high school, we've got $75,000 for parking lots and sidewalks. This gets back to my whole sort of road poor thing. I would cut that down dramatically unless you have specific lots and walks that need to be paved right now. Same thing with carpet and tile. It's tentatively scheduled for Cox and Jones. We have $105,000 earmarked for carpet and tile replacement at Cox and Jones. And again, the word is tentative, so if it doesn't need to be done, I don't think it's going to hurt it to wait a little bit longer. That's just some of the cuts that I would make. Doesn't it? You know, it adds up to a little bit more than what we're talking about now. I think that the other thing, I've mentioned consolidating a school. We just heard that there are only 4 open rooms, but there was a period of time when we had 700 or 800 more kids in less space than we currently have now. We're going to get another $400,000 grant for the Guilford Food Bank. Again, this is the state giving away money. The state's giving us $1 million for the VFW. They're giving us $400,000 for the food bank. They're giving us $400,000 or $500,000 for the parking lot downtown. They're giving us $3.5 million for the road construction. It's no wonder the state's bankrupt. So I think some changes could be made. To me, a lot of this is pretty easy. Some of it requires some time. So having voted yes to the first budget, I'm going to vote no to these cuts, as I believe that this process I had hoped to start later, and I voted yes also so that I didn't want to build any ill will with the people in this room and with the people whose names are attached to some of the numbers that I just mentioned. But again, I bear no one any ill will. I think that it's difficult to make cuts, and if we don't make some difficult decisions at some point, by next year, we're going to be pushing 100 million, and I didn't even mention, we're spending the money that's coming in faster than it's coming in. This grand plan that some people have, thinking that we can develop our way out of our spending spree, is ludicrous. We're taking in $650,000, $700,000 a year in anticipated revenue currently from the rock pile. You'd have to put up 3 or 4 of those every single year in order to not have any tax increases. Now we're salivating over this 66 High Street that's going to come online, hopefully in a year, and that's going to generate probably between 1 and 1.2 million, which is nice, but how many times can you do it? And now there's talk about doing high-density condos down at the Navtech site, but all of these changes affect the character of the town, and not necessarily in a good way. And we haven't even factored in the cost of a lot of these changes. There is a cost to adding housing stock to the town. 1 or 2, the marginal cost might be close to 0, but we're talking about over 1% in incremental new homes to town. We have roughly 9,800 homes. You're talking 60-ish over at High Street. They want to do 100 down at the Navtech, and there are also condos going in up at Goose Lane. That's the plan for up there. So you're talking about a greater than 1% increase in housing stock. That will increase the cost of the fire, the police, the clerk's office in town, the education budget. So again, at some point, somebody has to look at alternative ways that we can cut costs. We can't just sit here and try to nickel and dime $5,000 and $10,000 out of a budget every year.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ken?
Yes, well, I don't think we can walk away from the process and that was involved in the construction of these budgets. Everyone on this board voted for the budget that was submitted to the voters that went down by the 40 votes. We were fully engaged in the development of those budgets. Going back to December, and in some cases even earlier than December, there were endless meetings that we all attended. And some of the items that my colleague is raising here, I might submit, should have been rightfully raised earlier in the process, because this went not to the margins, but to the sinew of the budgets themselves. I thought then, and I think now, that we did produce responsible budgets. And and we have to respect the will of the voters. Even though it was 14.7%, it could have been 3% of the voters of Guilford that decided to turn out and vote, and we'd have to respect that vote, because that was the vote. Yet, there are some of us, call us Pollyanna, that in our attitude, that might believe that do believe that many people in Guilford were just asleep at the switch, starting with our boards, with not doing enough to promote the budget. And it is hard to believe that on resubmitting these budgets to the voters that more people will not come out and vote. And I think that we are mindful of the process here. We have made reductions that I think have been carefully described by both Charlie and Bill Bloss and Dr. Freeman on the education side. And I think that we are responding to this. Also, I'd like to quote the first selectman, who isn't here. Sometimes I misquote him, but I'll quote him, I think, accurately, where he said, everywhere in the state process you can move the responsibility around, but the buck does stop here. And it does stop at the town level. We are the ones that have to impose taxes on our neighbors. And we have to follow what we're given on the state level. And we are facing a reduction, and even our 200,000 estimate could be grossly overstated. We don't know.
Yeah,
and yet I also am opposed to dipping into fund balance. I think we carefully built it up over the years, and I agree with the chairman that if we go to it once, we're going to go to it every year, and we'll be back in the same plight that we were originally. So I believe these are responsible cuts, and I'll support it.
Anybody else? Peter?
I work in Stamford. It's interesting when I tell people I live in Guilford, they tell me what a great town. They love coming to the shoreline. They think it's one of the most beautiful towns in all of New England. And I agree with them, and I'm very happy to live here. But not only is it a great town, it is extremely well managed. And I want to basically give the accolades where they belong. I think we have good selectmen, we have good first selectmen, that is, and good selectmen that are members of the committee, as well as I think the Board of Ed has done a tremendous job. Initially, when the budget was presented, the first selectman and the selectmen, they cut $400,000 off the original budget. The Board of Ed, as was pointed out earlier, cut $800,000. Now we're talking, and the mill rate, or not the mill rate, but the increase that the Board of Ed had, basically 1.99%, was the lowest that we've had in 5 years. And I think right from the start, I voted for the budget because I thought it was extremely responsible, and I thought Joe Mazik did a great job as far as the operating budget on the town of the Guilford side. So why do we have the increase? Well, one of the reasons obviously it keeps going up is because 80% of it has to do with salaries and health care. And obviously debt service, building a high school is going to increase part of that. So it shouldn't be really a surprise, but by cutting an additional $300,000, as our chairman has indicated, $150,000 from both the Board of Ed and the town budget, that's going to be a cut of about $700,000 from the initial budget that the town wanted, and roughly $950,000 from what the Board of Ed was asking for. So I think the budget is sound. I have to support it the way it is, with the additional $300,000 cut from both Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen. But the other thing is that was brought up using the rainy day fund, or the fund that basically provides an emergency source of revenue in the event that we have an emergency. This would not be an emergency to use it basically for this particular budget, because of the fact that the budget is sound. It's not an emergency. It is a practical budget, and I believe personally that the reason it didn't pass the first time, not because it wasn't a good budget, but too few people came out. And I think if the people come out and represent the normal population that votes, I think it would pass with flying colors. So I think this is a sound budget, and it supports a quality town, and I think we really need to support it.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Matt. I supported the previous budget. I support these cuts, and just as importantly, the realistic assessment that we're going to need to recognize reduced income from the state. I mean, I think that's responsible budgeting, and I think that's just the practical reality of what it is we're dealing with, trying to craft a budget with not complete information, okay, which we have to contend with every year, and the state's been sort of problematical for many years. I don't want to just ignore the comments Mr. McKenzie has laid out, and he did have a number of points, but I do want to say that on balance, I disagree with most of them, more on the sense that it's easier to just take a scalpel or a hatchet to certain line items, and much more difficult to actually enact those changes and to govern going forward. There's multiple parts to governing, and there's multiple stakeholders, and the taxpayers are of great concern. We are fortunate to have a body like this that is designed to look out for the taxpayers, and I think I've said this in previous years. I suspect that the other boards are certainly aware that they have their own responsibility, and I think they exercise that very judiciously and thoughtfully. but that there's additional steps that they face before they get approval. And it's got to come up to this desk, and it's got to move off of this desk, and the town then has a chance to look at it. So there's multiple opportunities to be heard on these spending proposals, as well as reduction proposals and cuts. So we have the taxpayers. There's the same exact taxpayers in many cases are people who receive services from the school district, from the town, from the use of the roads, from maintenance of our facilities. And it's, so there's the same people sometimes are on both sides of the equation, maybe disproportionately on one side or the other, and I suspect that's what drives some voting from, to one side of the column or the other. But it's not just those, right? There's the workers of the town, and it's all well and good to say that we're going to freeze people for a year and then another year, and then we're going to cut them in subsequent years. I mean, managing that has consequences, and the other two stakeholders above would feel those consequences, I suspect. There's the leaders of the town. Overpaid, you can always make that argument. I mean, clearly there are pay equity issues, but I think that people are pretty much satisfied, and the thing with elected officials is if somebody's really out of line, there's only so long you have to put up with it, and then, it's see you later. So there is an opportunity to manage that. I guess there was a couple bullet points, and I don't just want to focus on Mr. McKenzie's comments, but he had a long list, and I think I don't want to suggest that it should be dismissed out of hand by any means. I think some or all of those are worth discussing, but not at this point, not at this budget, and I don't see them as a reason to vote no, but I'll pick just a couple of the highlights that hit me quickly. So like bonding the lights at the high school, for years we have been pushing both the town and the school board to have more capital in their operating budget to reduce the pressure on bonding. Part of that was in anticipation of this high school coming online and the need to have capacity to borrow what we needed to borrow to get the school done, but it's also good municipal planning to have certain expenses in capital expenses in the operating expense. User fees, he mentioned hockey, and he's kind enough to point out it's an important event for his family, and I love hockey. I couldn't never skate backwards, but I certainly like watching it, right? User fees are a problem for me. I mean, that's not just like, well, we're going to pick on hockey. I mean, are we going to start charging the band to use the stage and the maintenance of that fabulous facility that we have, the football players and the field hockey players? I mean, I think arts and entertainment and sports and various other activities are part of the academic experience, and they're an important part of it, and it's the town's responsibility to see that we have well-rounded students. And for 4 years to pay for varsity sports and to support club sports are an important part of the educational responsibility that we have as a town. So there's just a couple points. I'd be happy to discuss all of them over time, but to me, none of those reasons amount to a basis to vote no against this revised budget as you've proposed it. I don't think we have a motion on the floor yet, but I would be inclined to vote yes. Anybody else?
I'd just like to say that the proposed 150 reduction in the town and the Board of Ed are reductions that I would support as well. In going through the listening to the presentations by Selectman Haverda, the reductions that he gave were, that he discussed were across a number of different areas, so the cost wouldn't be borne by solely one department. The capital improvements would be the largest reduction, and again, those are spread out over a number of different areas. On the Board of Ed side, I think as has been discussed several times, the salaries and benefits compose a significant portion of the education budget, and the reductions they can make in teacher salary lines, they can only go so far before we really start to see the impact and the services that we're providing to the students. I think the 150 in that area is acceptable to me, and I also think the $200,000 reduction is probably not going to be enough ultimately when we finally get the figures from Hartford as to what we're going to be receiving from them in the way of state assistance. So I would not be inclined to tap into the undesignated fund balance as a line item, because this could be a year when we end up needing to visit that down the road, depending on what the folks up in Hartford ultimately decide to do. And I'd hate, and setting that, keeping that out of the budget to me is responsible budgeting, because we want to have that fund there in case something unexpected happens, and then we'll be in a position to continue to provide the services that the citizens of the town require. So for those reasons, and lastly, I just want to echo the comments that have been made that, yes, the turnout was low, but we do have to respect the decision that was made by the voters last week. And I think this, these changes do show that we've listened to the results that not only we have, but the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education have, and have tried to adopt or to incorporate or propose changes that you know, make again what I thought was already a responsible budget even more fiscally prudent. So for those reasons, I would support the changes that you suggested.
Ken? Question, Mr. Chairman, of you. I don't know the answer to this question.
Hopefully
in the event the budget is turned down again and we go to a third referendum and perhaps a fourth, I'm of the understanding, and again, maybe incorrectly, that there comes a point in time, I think in June, wherein
we have a budget in place by June 30th,
we revert to last year's number.
Right.
And my question is, what about the $2 million in debt service?
Obligation, it has to be paid.
So do we get the old budget plus the $2 million, or so we have to make cuts of the $2 million to offset that debt service number?
Right. You still have the opportunity to pass a budget beyond June 30th. What you do is you, by law, send out tax bills that reflect the previous year's mill rate, and you still continue to work towards passing a budget. You have to have, the legislative body has to pass a budget at some point. That's by charter and by state statute. So, and your question,
so presumably then to pay that, then it's likely that we would need to dip in, if that were to come to fruition, it's likely, or it's not inconceivable, we would be dipping into some sort of reserve fund balance to pay the debt service.
if we were unable to get a budget that accommodated it, yeah. We would. No, Mike,
To
okay.
be fair to that, though, the $2 million doesn't get paid, it gets paid monthly. I mean, it's not, you know, obviously. But nonetheless, there would be fund balance at risk.
Agreed. I just, Ken, you brought up a number of good points, and I think, several of them, I'm sure, will be discussed at both the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, and perhaps even at our meeting. And maybe it does make sense for us to do some kind of workshop between the three boards to talk about, let's go back to Ted's thing. Where are we on some of these efficiency things? Where are we with some of the suggestions that we all might have relative to areas, and whether or not those could be explored or realized or debunked. But I think open engagement probably makes some sense at some point. And I'd be willing to talk to the respective boards to see if we could pull that together. There's part of what you were saying, and I'm not picking one thing to argue with you. That's not my intention here. Not my intention. It's interesting the way you posture how we relate to the state and how the state relates to us. The state is providing us money, but the state could probably save that money to help the rest of the state out of the jam they're in. I may have fallen prey over the years to the simple fact that Guilford sends so much money to Hartford, and our taxpayers don't get much in return. They get very little. We in 1996 got $3,028,000 in education cost-sharing monies from the state of Connecticut. In 2016, we got $3,058,000. So over 20 years, we picked up $30,000 in additional revenue from the state for ECS. So part of me says, all right, maybe we can take some money for some roads, because we're not getting what the state had committed to giving us when they put the ECS formula in place, and they imposed the Teacher's Salary Enhancement Act in the early 1990s, where they said they would fund the increased salaries for teachers for municipalities. I have more data than I should have, and my employer probably doesn't know that I spend as much time doing this stuff as I do during work hours. But in 1996, the state of Connecticut provided 11.55% of the education budget in the town of Guilford. In 2016, they provided 5.32%. Had they provided funding at the 11.55% in 2016, the state would have given us an additional $3.5 or $3.6 million. So they reneged on a promise. They put a funding mechanism in place which they haven't lived up to. So occasionally taking $3 million for a road project, not too bad, since I think over the last 20 plus years, they've shorted us by $36 million. And again, it goes back to the fact that our taxpayers, we send a lot of money to Hartford. I don't know where we rank in terms of state income tax. I'm sure someone can find that and probably Google it in about 5 minutes and figure that out. But I know that we're not getting a lot back. So that's just one comment. I think what I wanted to get out was the fact that we have not gotten the level of funding for our education system, which is mandated by the state, and they passed formulas for funding that they haven't lived up to. Anyway, enough. Get off my soapbox. I'm going to put my recommendation in the form of a motion, and I'm not going to delineate the specific dollar amounts from the various departments. We'll leave that to the Board of Selectmen when they have the opportunity to meet as a board and make those decisions, even though you didn't take any actions on it at your last meeting. There was some consideration that we needed to identify specifically where those cuts were. That does not necessarily have to happen. We don't have the right to tell the Board of Education where they cut the money from. What we will do when we publish the budget estimates tomorrow there'll be an additional line item, Board of Finance cuts, in each of the respective budgets. So we'll leave that up to the discretion of the two boards to figure out the money. I was at one point comfortable with going with the $150,000 that you delineated. I think I was going to pull it. I think we're going to take out the $15,000 for engineering public works to get it down to $150 from $165. But I don't see a need to do that. We'll publish the budget with two distinct line items that say Board of Finance cuts for each of the respective budgets. So that is in the form of a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? No further discussion?
Move the question.
Move the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Me.
And no abstentions. Thank you. Thank you to the Board of Selectmen. Thank you to the Board of Education. Anyone want to address the board in public forum?
One more.
One more.
My first question is, could you run over the numbers one more time of where the gap between the 4 whatever spending increase and the 2% mill increase, where the funding mechanism comes that closes that gap?
I think part of it is there was money in the bonding. Geez, I wish she was here. There's some of that bond premium. Thank you. Bond premium that was allocated over 2 years. So that's a big number. It's a couple $100,000, right? That could have been allocated in 1 year or over a couple of years. But it was in fact spread out over 2 years, one of which is we're realizing this year. So you guys know the number, hard number, it's like 200,000, right? Okay, so there's $200,000 of revenue that, contrary to the one-time revenue use rule, is perfectly applicable in this case because we're trying to cover a debt service hit that is a spike, and so we're smoothing that out a little bit with that money. There was an increase in the grand list that was, and I should have the numbers, a couple $100,000.
600 to 700,000.
I think it was 26 million, point eight.
That the net revenue increase is.
0.87% increase in the grand list.
Right, so how much revenue is that?
I think it's 26 million, but then that gets
600,000.
600, oh, that, okay.
That's the question.
Yeah.
So those are the two big revenue hits, plus this $500,000 from the state.
From MRSA, and the anticipated mill rate increase.
I understand.
It all
So
adds up.
my question is on the bond revenue that was coming back. If we had chosen not to apply it, as you're applying now, would it have gone back into the undesignated fund balance?
No, it just gotten used in another year.
Another year, okay. So
That's
that's
right. It would have been applied towards,
it just gets applied.
it is.
Right, but it was applied in a way.
Okay. The second question I had was, does this board have a line item veto on the town side budget? Do you have the
We
ability?
have
to-
department level. We have
At the department level.
Department level,
You do?
correct.
So if we were to raise the question back to one of the original questions, which had to do with the consolidation of either the Board of Ed and the town's finance departments, or the Board of Ed and the town's facility departments, or even we go to the technology departments, where it was your desire to motivate people to consummate that consolidation, this board does in fact have the ability to reduce the budgets in the administrative level for those
Absolutely.
departments and force that issue.
Certainly does.
All right. So my question as a taxpayer is, given the recommendation of the Efficiency Task Force, I'm sort of curious as to, we've sort of known about this for a period of time. There are other towns who've already gone through this process successfully. It's been 6 years. Why haven't we done more to initiate that process?
I'm going to give you the same answer I gave you before. It's a purview of the Board of Selectmen to manage the operations of the town. It is a purview of the Board of Education to manage the operations of the Board of Education. I do not, and this is one man's opinion, I do not feel that we legislate from this podium, this desk.
I understand. Okay, just
So
asking
that's
a
a
question.
philosophical difference that you and I have.
I don't know if we have a-
And Ted,
I
will
don't
tell
know
you,
that we have a philosophical
that's no su-
difference.
that's
I'm
no
just asking the
surprise because-
question.
That's no surprise, because we've had this discussion over the years.
I'm not sure it's a philosophical decision. I'm just asking the question from a process point of view. Does the board have it? And you're indicating that you do.
We have line item, we have department level control
Right.
of approval of the budgets.
All right. And then I would just make one more statement on the public record, having listened to the Board of Ed presentation this evening, having been through budget cuts back in the 90s when we had kids hanging out the windows because we didn't have the money to do what we needed to do, and knowing where this budget is this year with the Board of Ed, and knowing all the other things that are in the Board of Education budget that could be reduced, postponed, mitigated, rearranged. I personally find it somewhat disingenuous that the first cut that is mentioned in what will happen in reduction in spending is that we will lay off the newest teachers for the lowest amount of gain to increase class size. And my opinion is there are a lot of other areas that we could look if and when the reductions are needed, and that doesn't necessarily need to be the first thing that the Board of Ed goes and does. And in discussing the consolidation of the finance departments, the facilities departments, the technology departments, all those areas, in my opinion, those are all areas that we could look to before we had to increase class sizes in order to accommodate the budgetary reductions that people are looking to make. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Joe Petrowski again. Just to the members of the Board of Finance, I think you made a very reasonable decision here. Any deeper cuts would have been very, very reckless. I think you did what you had to do. And the problem, as I said before, with me wasn't the money. And I was shocked that it went down. The problem was the yes voters stayed home. Any further cuts would have impinged the town services and slowed up the momentum of the Board of Ed, and I hope that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
This tape is going to run out?
Usually that happens when Joe's up here. Gary?
A couple of brief comments. One is that the single largest increase in this budget is an item that was approved by 85% of the voters of this town, at a number that is significantly higher that it's in here, due to a number of fortuitous circumstances, mainly that the interest rates are down. And so, you know, the big number was really approved by a vast majority. I may be correct, but I think it's 85%. The Board of Selectmen did a couple of things that went into the budget that hadn't been, and not to the extent that the Board of Education did, but we put some of the smaller capital items into operating costs. We've been talking about that as a board as long as I've been on it. The Board of Ed did that. I mean, I happen to think that paint probably shouldn't be capitalized and spread over 20 years. And so we've done some of that. That bumped our numbers somewhat. And lastly, and not to the extent that you mentioned about the teachers' salaries, but we have mandate. We are the last resort. So we get mandates, no funding, we have to spend some money on certain things. It increases the budget every year. It's unfortunately the way it happens.